Mr. Majewski's Anatomy 32 class lecture, Chapter 22, Part 1, Hypothalamus and Pituitary Glands. So, let's start with what is the endocrine system. Well, it turns out that it is a system composed of organs and glands, specifically endocrine glands, and that they produce hormones that help coordinate body activities. So we have the nervous system that coordinates body activities on the quick, and then we have the endocrine glands that release hormones that control and coordinate body activities at a slightly slower pace. So, just a reminder, glands are a group of epithelial cells that make and secrete a substance. The exocrine glands have a duct that then releases the substance out into an open space, whether it's inside a organ or on the surface of our skin. The endocrine does not have a duct, and it secretes its hormone into the interstitial fluid or into the bloodstream directly. There are basically three ways that a gland can be stimulated. There is humoral stimulation. So in this case, the gland is able to detect what's going on in the bloodstream, and if a particular condition is met, then that gland will produce and release that hormone. The second is neural stimulation. Our nervous system can tell the gland that, hey, you need to start secreting a particular substance. And then there's hormonal stimulus, which basically means that a hormone is produced by one gland that then stimulates another gland somewhere else in the body that then does whatever it does. So, some important functions of hormones. Well, obviously, they help to regulate. They regulate all kinds of things, chemical composition and volume of the internal environment, such as the bloodstream, metabolism and energy balance, contraction of smooth and cardiac muscle fibers, glandular secretions in other glands, and it also is even involved in some immune system activities. Hormones can also control growth and development. Just think about puberty. And they also can regulate operations of the reproductive systems. And then, finally, they can also establish the circadian rhythms of a person. Circadian rhythm being basically our sort of internal clock for waking and sleeping. So we're going to focus first on the hypothalamus, which is part of the brain, and the pituitary gland. These two have been tied with the control of the endocrine system as a whole. If you look at the pituitary gland, you see that it has a posterior area, referred to as the posterior pituitary gland, and an anterior area, referred to as the anterior pituitary gland. And they are attached to the hypothalamus by the infundibulum. So here again, here is the hypothalamus, the posterior and anterior pituitary glands. And it turns out the hypothalamus is actually the structure in charge. It's basically the major integrating link between the nervous system and the endocrine system, which, since both of these systems are involved in controlling what goes on in the body, it's very good that they communicate with each other. So let's start with what happens with the anterior pituitary gland. Well, it turns out that if the hypothalamus releases particular hormones, it will control what goes on in the anterior pituitary gland. For instance, if it releases what are called releasing hormones, then the anterior pituitary gland will release its hormones. And if the hypothalamus releases its inhibiting hormones, then it'll stop the anterior pituitary gland from releasing hormones. And this happens because the hypothalamus will produce these hormones into the interstitial area. It'll go into this lovely capillary bed, go through the hypophyseal portal into this second capillary bed, where it'll then be able to affect the anterior pituitary gland. And these hormones that cause responses in other glands of the endocrine system are referred to as tropic hormones. Now, when you get to the anterior pituitary gland, it produces quite a few hormones. First on the list is the human growth hormone. This hormone basically stimulates growth throughout the body. It stimulates the liver, muscles, bones, so forth, to synthesize and secrete insulin-like growth factors, so you get overall growth. There's the thyroid-stimulating hormones. These stimulate the synthesis and secretion of thyroid hormones. The follicle-stimulating hormones Turns out these will initiate development of oocytes and induce ovarian secretion of estrogens. And in males, they will stimulate the testes to produce sperm. Then there's the luteinizing hormones, also affecting our gonads. In ovaries, it stimulates secretion of estrogen and progesterone, ovulation of the oocyte, and the formation of the corpus luteum. And in the testes, it stimulates testosterone production. There's prolactin. This promotes milk secretion in mammary glands. There's the adrenocorticotropic hormone. This stimulates the secretion of glucocorticoids in the adrenal cortex, which then regulates glucose levels in the body. And also melanocyte-stimulating hormones. They're not really sure exactly what this does, but they do know it affects brain activity. And if it's in high enough levels, it'll actually cause the skin to darken because you produce more pigment in your skin. So these 4 out of these 7 hormones are actually tropic hormones. They are affecting other glands that are then producing hormones themselves. The thyroid-stimulating hormone, the follicle-stimulating hormone, the luteinizing hormone, and the adrenocorticotropic hormone. Pituitary disorders. Well, if you have hyposecretion of human growth hormone, you are what's called a pituitary dwarf. You have pituitary dwarfism. So you are proportionally correct, but you don't grow to be very tall, maybe a couple of feet. And then there's the opposite, which is hypersecretion of human growth hormone. In this case, again, you're relatively proportionally correct, but you are way much taller than expected for the average human being. Hypo, little, hyper, lots. All right, let's move on to the posterior pituitary gland. So it turns out the posterior pituitary gland does not actually produce hormones. Instead, it stores hormones that are produced by the hypothalamus. So here is the cells that produce hormones in the hypothalamus, and they basically just have extensions out into the posterior pituitary gland, where those hormones are then deposited until they are needed. And of course, posterior pituitary gland has its own set of capillaries for when it does secrete those hormones. So these are 2 main hormones. One is oxytocin. Oxytocin stimulates the contraction of the uterus during childbirth, and it also causes the cells of the mammary glands to eject milk. Not to produce milk, but to eject it so that it can then be present for when that hungry little baby is out in the world. Oxytocin is also considered the love hormone. It's found to cause people to be kinder to each other, to like other people better. And it turns out that oxytocin is produced in males, although not at the same levels as in women. And then there's the antidiuretic hormone, also known as vasopressin. This hormone's job, as you kind of guess from its name, is to conserve body water. And it does this by affecting kidneys, which will then decrease the urine volume. It'll also decrease the amount of perspiration in the skin, and it raises blood pressure, basically because if you're holding in more water, that's going to increase the volume of the amount of blood in the bloodstream, and that will in fact increase blood pressure. So that's it for the this part of the endocrine system. Hope you enjoyed it.